So you've been shooting Monuments Men?
Yes, I did that at the beginning of the year in Berlin with the lovely Mr. Clooney and Mr. Damon.
So that's going to be kind of a period thriller? Does that quite...
But it's infused with Grant Heslov and George's particular sense of the ridiculous. So it's a really interesting. I certainly didn't know about a pocket of World War II history about these men, architects, historians, curators who were sanctioned by Roosevelt to go in and locate all the stolen art that was stolen by the Nazis. So it's a very powerful story, but there's a lot of the ridiculous along the way.
So I saw the Woody Allen Blue Jasmine last night, and I have to congratulate you.
Oh,
because
that's a relief.
Not only is it one of the great roles that he's done for a woman, but it's one of the only roles for a woman this summer.
Right.
It is just a graveyard out there, and thank God that there's something rich and wonderful to look at. But why do you find that you don't get as many great roles as there should be in your pile at the top of the heap?
You look at Meryl Streep's career, Judi Dench's career, Helen Mirren's career, Michelle Williams' career. I mean, there's Amy Adams. I mean, the list is endless. I think you just have to pick your way through them. And summer's probably a particular time. I mean, I think probably as the year progresses, you'll be seeing some extraordinary performances.
So when you work with Mr. Allen on a movie like this, is it all on the written page? How much talking do you and Woody do? Because he has a reputation for kind of leaving actors a bit on their own.
Often he's, you have to take the very little he says. He's very judicious about what he says. We spoke very briefly on the phone. I'd never met him. I mean, I met him at the camera tests in San Francisco, and I love camera tests because no one's really looking at the things you do, so you can try things out, and it's a time to see how the character will be visually presented, because of course even before you open your mouth, that reveals a lot about the character's emotional state and their social standing, etc., etc. But so he was quite spare, but I don't know how else to work unless it's in dialogue. I'm not particularly needy, and I don't really have a way of working. I think the material reveals that. But Woody, perhaps more than any other director, obviously because he writes and directs, 97% of his direction is in the script. His word choices, it's a lot of the absurd and tragic elements. It's situational, so you just have to be alive to that and pick up those clues. And then he and Juliet Taylor always cast his films so brilliantly and often unexpectedly. For me, the difficult thing was, and where I did ask a lot of questions, was about tone.
Yeah.
Because, I read the script and I laughed out loud several times, but then I also found it quite moving and disturbing. And then, Peter, you're going to be working with Peter Sarsgaard and the wonderful Sally Hawkins, who I think is she's divine in the film. And I loved working with her. And you're working with her, but then you're also working with Andrew Dice Clay. So how is this going to pan out? And he said two things to me. He said, remember, she's mad. And then he said 3 weeks in, he said, this is a serious movie. But then I still found, even when I was playing Blanche Dubois, say, on stage, or Richard II, or I've just come off stage in the production of The Maids, you don't want to make, if something's tragic, you don't want to make it heavy. So you've got to find the lightness and the buoyancy. So even if you're playing Phaedra, you want to find the moments of the absurd in that, so that it doesn't become weighty. So even though he was saying it was a serious movie, I think all of us knew that there was a lot of the absurdity of life in it.
How would you compare this character, Jasmine, to Blanche Dubois? There seems to be a great deal of references there.
I think there are some signposts, but the way it pans out in terms of the relationships are quite different. But I think there's many, of course, and I think the detritus of the great roles, when and I've been lucky enough to play like Hedda Gabler and Blanche, and that they remain with you, And it'd be foolish not to be alive to how they've expanded you as an actor. But this is a Woody Allen film, and the rhythm of the writing is so entirely different. But certainly they're both epic fantasists, and have chosen fantasy over reality, but reality is, that's the freight train that they ultimately get run over by, because the world's a harsh place, and, they're fragile flowers.
So Woody's pretty tough on this movie, on this character. And one of the things I noticed do you read reviews? Do you actually read? Manola Dargis wrote a very good one in the New York Times, and one of the things she said, and perhaps you disagree, but I'd be curious to know, she says that in some ways she wonders if Woody and you are pulling in different directions sometimes with this character, that there's a certain tension between the writing and the performance. Did you feel that?
In a way that she found...
She approved of it.
Right. I think it's... We didn't, there wasn't a lot of discussion. He'd say when he didn't like something, or, and I would say when I wanted to go again, or, and oftentimes, I think directors are the same, and I think actors are the same. You don't always know what it is. You try to be in control of what you're offering, but there's a certain element where we're never sure how we're perceived. So therefore you have to trust the director when they're pushing in different ways. And I think being in slight tension, if that's the case, is often something you seek it out, because there's tension that's not constructive. But I think an actor will always be in slight tension with the script, so that you're trying to keep it buoyant. Because if you're just playing, if you just film the script, then the thing doesn't come alive.
So there was a real East Side woman that this character was based on, anecdotally. Were you aware of that?
We went out to dinner one night, and Sunyi was talking about someone that they knew very vaguely or had heard about, a woman who's, because of the financial scandal around her husband, who ended up going to jail. She had 2 children. She ended up working in a shoe store. And I think the genesis of that, fall from grace, was where Woody started percolating the idea for Blue Jasmine. But I certainly didn't base it on any one person. It's those tragedies. The tragedy of Jasmine is a very common one, and I don't just think in the Upper East Side. I think people who have suddenly, having been thinking they were financially secure, have lost their home in the middle of America and have had to completely reassess who they are in the world, who they thought they were. She's got a particular fall from grace because of her social circle and the profound social embarrassment that she's running away from. But then there's the strand which is much more poetic, I think, in that she's, I would hazard a guess that she's always been a fantasist. She changed her name. She's estranged from her biological beginnings. If you look at the difference in the 2 sisters, I think that's a brilliance on Woody's part to have made them so radically different, but so that have they ever really known one another? She's estranged from herself, I think, from the get-go. But so there wasn't any one person I based it on. But you'd be foolish not to use all that stuff that's out in the zeitgeist at the moment.
So if you were to compare working with Woody with some of the other directors you've worked with, I think of David Fincher, for example, or how about David Fincher?
Well, they're both very exacting. The unique thing and the refreshing thing about Woody, I think, is that he cares deeply about the work, and he doesn't care at all. And I think I think it's great. I think it must be from his stand-up. We're moving on. We've got it, and we've got it. It's not that he'll fix it up in post. It's just he wants to keep that. He doesn't want anything to get too precious, and I think that's what gives his films their particular buoyancy. Is that people are throwing things up and seeing what they're making gambits. The actors are making gambits. He's making gambits as a when he's inside them as a performer himself, but also as a screenwriter. And there's no preciousness in it, and I found that really refreshing. But they're both utterly unique. I mean, and I've had the great pleasure of working with directors like David Fincher and Soderbergh and Scorsese and who are and Woody, who are so. They're all auteurs. There's always a particular texture or a line of investigation that's in there.
And Terrence Malick?
And Terrence Malick.
Where are we with that? And who did you actually work with in terms of, and how much time did you spend?
Well, that's the thing, isn't it? I was always going to be in the film that he was making in Austin, but who knows if I end up in the film? I mean,
he might put you in the other one.
Well, yes, or
did you do both?
Or not? And then he said, would I do a few days in the one that he was making in Los Angeles?
There's a lot of overlapping cast.
Yeah, but there's no script, and even between the LA picture and the Austin picture, there was even less information. He calls it going fishing. You go fishing, and he sees what takes his fancy, what interests him. And and then it's like it's a piece of poetry. I don't know if they're films. I think they're something else. I think he's inventing something else. But it couldn't have been a more different process. Between going from this San Francisco, New York experience with Woody and that incredible cast to literally working with, but both of them were made in a shoestring, and that's the way they maintain their creative freedom in the current climate. From the text being really vital to the text being utterly irrelevant. It was fascinating. And I think those different experiences keep. You can't have I don't have a particular process. Of course, you do your work, but in the end, you just got to be alive to the moment.
Well, one of the things that Diane Keaton said was that Woody Allen has a very special gift for having the voice of a character come loud and clear. And I wondered if you heard your character right away reading that script, like you knew exactly who she was, or how much work went into building up the character that you created.
I think you get a sense of them immediately, and then when you know who the other cast are, it begins to come alive even before you've got there. But I think the challenge was to make sure that there was a depth there that you could because the thing with the fascinating thing I found playing Jasmine is there's so many facades. She's different people depending on she's a different person with different people depending whether she's taken a Xanax or had a Stoli martini, but also depending on how much fear the interactions, what's bubbling to the surface, and I think that it was important for me to calibrate that immediate understanding, because I didn't want it to flatline. And not that the script was at all flatline. I think there's a lot of dynamics in what he wrote.
The question of how mad she is an interesting one.
Yes.
She calms down when there's a rich man on the horizon.
Yes, but also the world's mad. I mean, maybe that's where she connects with Blanche, is that you can play a faded Southern belle or you can play a fallen Upper East Side princess, but there's something broken in the world in which she finds herself. I mean, to have been in that marriage, and it's not the moral transgression, although she's shamed by it of her husband's the financial scandal. It's the personal betrayal as a woman that ultimately breaks her open. She gets attacked by the dentist when, and then she attaches to a man who sees in her an opportunity to have a first lady of sorts, and so she's having to fill that fantasy. I mean, the world is also broken.
Thank you very much.